Good evening and welcome everyone. I'd like to especially welcome any new members who are here with us tonight. My name is Chelsea and I'm the president of the Portland chapter of the Native Plant Society of Oregon. NPSO promotes the enjoyment, study, and protection of Oregon's native plants. And as part of our mission, we present a speaker each month on timely topics of interest to our members. Tonight is our special double feature to New Zealand with photos from Virginia Bowers and Paul Slichter. A couple of quick announcements. We have many hikes coming up. We just did our annual hike leader planning meeting, and we have two this month, as well as a couple of stewardship events, one at Mosier on the 22nd. So be sure to find more information on those in our newsletter, as well as using the link to our Google Calendar, which I think Lisa will put in our chat. Before we begin, let's go over a couple of Zoom etiquettes. Your audio and video should be turned off during the program. And if you have any questions during the program, go ahead and put that in the chat box. You'll see a button for that at the bottom of your screen. Our presenters will address these questions as time allows after each of their presentation. You may notice a closed caption feature, which you can click to enable. We welcome you to stay after the program for our social portion of the evening. At that time, you'll be able to turn on your sound and video for continued conversation on tonight's program, as well as upcoming events and activities of interest. We hope that you can join us for this active discussion between NPSO members and others interested in native plants and our regional environment. Now I'll introduce our guest hosts for the evening, Virginia Bowers and Paul Slichter. Virginia led her first NPSO hike last spring to Four Sisters, a place in the gorge near and dear to her heart, as she helped acquire it when she was working for the Columbia Land Trust. She was also involved in acquiring several properties at nearby Mill Creek Ridge. Virginia is an amateur plant geek who is still learning. She loves hiking, backpacking, wildflowers, mushrooms, and nature in general. Recently retired, Virginia now has time to do more of what she loves, travel and explore forests and gardens. Her yard is backyard certified and includes lots of native plants. She has been to New Zealand twice, once in the fall of 2023 and again in their late spring in 2025. Okay. Now on to Paul. Paul is a retired high school biology teacher and longtime chapter member. He has served on many NPSO committees, such as a chapter field trip coordinator, a field trip coordinator for 3 of the NPSO state annual meetings. He's given numerous programs at chapter meetings and currently is busy conducting rare plant surveys and general plant monitoring for various public and private entities in both Oregon and Washington. While teaching high school students, he built a website for students to use. He has since expanded it to display photos and information about much of the flora of the Pacific Northwest. Paul joined Washington Rare Care in 2008 and has conducted dozens of rare plant surveys and reported over 100 rare plant occurrences, more than half new. No doubt his floral senses were activated in New Zealand. Paul manages the Facebook pages for the Portland chapter and Oregon Flora and actively conducts plant surveys for local conservation organizations. Paul has learned a lot about our local flora from chapter members over the years and believes it's important to do his share in paying it forward. We are excited now to welcome Virginia.
All right. Are we ready? And I can share now? All right. Wait, we can just go in here, share. Okay. Can anybody see that?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. All right, there we go. Yes, there I need it. How can I get, oh, I know what I need to do. Sorry, hide. There we go. Kia ora. welcome everyone. My name is Virginia Bowers, as you mentioned, and I'm excited to take you all on a tour of New Zealand plants. I have been there twice, March, March of 2023 and December of 2025. So that is actually spring and summer. And this picture actually is a view of the South Island, the part of the Routburn track, which is fairly near Milford Sound, if some of you all have heard of that. And why is it not working? Here we go. Um, so this could be the Pacific Northwest, correct? But if you look more closely, you will find and notice that the plants, in fact, are quite different and very unique. This, as I both times I spent a lot of time out in the forest, or what they call the bush, um, noticing the plants and started taking photos and wanted to learn more about the sort of very unique environments in New Zealand. So did a little research, and New Zealand was part of the big Gondwana continent, but approximately 80 million years ago, it separated from that. And ever since the plants have been evolving in isolation. So that is one of the reasons why they are so unique. There are some plants and insects and animals that also came from Australia and South America. And again, that isolation has allowed them to go in unique directions. And I'm going to talk about some of the adaptations that I've learned about as we go. So this is a map of New Zealand. I've been to actually too many places to really put dots on the map, but New Zealand is quite long north to south. And so at the upper end, you have the more temperate or even almost tropical forests. And then down to that little Stewart Island on the south is almost semi-Arctic. It never gets very warm. And then you have the whole coastal areas, extensive coastal areas. I have been probably on both islands, and the photos are from all over the place. So I can talk about that more later. There's four major ecosystems in New Zealand. They're the coastal marine, which is there's a picture on the right showing the beach and the cliffs. And that is the coastal habits are quite, like I said, diverse from subtropical all the way to subantarctic. On the left is more of an alpine scene. Again, that's from the South Island. And then there is also the temperate rainforest, which is mostly what I spent time in and we'll see a lot of. One of the things that is very prevalent all over New Zealand are the epiphytes. There you will see all different kinds of epiphytes growing in the trees and shrubs. There's four different kinds. One is nest epiphyte, which is what you see on the left. I'm assuming that you guys see left and right like I do. And there's also orchid epiphytes, as well as shrub and tree epiphytes. So on the right is a kamahi, which is actually starts its life as an epiphyte in tree ferns, and then it sends its roots down to the ground and becomes a tree. And so that middle picture is actually the trunk of the kamahi after it's become more of a tree. The flowers here are very sweet, and the honeybees really like them. They make a nice honey. There are a multitude of grasses that grow all throughout New Zealand. One of the most important is something called flax or harakiki. And by the way, the names, I've got the Maori names usually first, and then the English name, and then the Latin name. So there's a number of flax variations, as I put that sign in there. But the main, but flax, by the way, is not the same as what you would find in North America. It's a different kind, it's different species altogether. This flax is very important to the Maori, and they make all kinds of products by weaving the flax. So things like baskets. Um, on the upper right is a skirt called a piu piu, which is a traditional ceremonial skirt that the Maori would wear. They would make just extensive things, baskets, buckets, ropes, mats. And apparently the flax cording is so strong that they were able to bind the sections of their logs together to create their huge ocean-going canoes. I thought that was pretty amazing. Another grass also used for weaving is the kakaha, bush lily. It provides a little bit of different color to the flax, so they will use them together. And then those the orange berries are actually edible as well. Next, I want to talk about ferns because ferns are everywhere in New Zealand, and there are all different kinds of ferns. There's tree ferns, which you'll sort of you see a little bit in the picture on the right, the waterfall. This is just kind of a cool picture on the left of the ferns, the new fronds growing. New Zealand has over 200 species of ferns, which you can compare to Oregon, which is only 40. And Oregon's probably, I don't know how many times size of New Zealand. There's just an immense variety of ferns. So here's just some examples. On the left is called pico pico or hennin chicks, and you can see the little lightly colored bit or flecks or bulblets on the pico pico, which are another way that they reproduce. I thought it was kind of a cool name. Then the interesting coloration in that middle fern on the backside. A lot of plants in New Zealand aren't always just green. They have some interesting colors, which was explained to me at some point why that is. These cool filmy ferns, they have several different species of filmy ferns, which are actually see-through. And when it's dry, they'll shrivel up, but they're not dead. They will actually come back once the spring starts. And then to the right is a hound's tongue fern, which I saw everywhere, and it's actually a climbing fern. It grows up on the trees. And this is one of those plants where the juvenile leaf is very different from the mature. The juvenile is just a straight, long, with no lobes. And then the more mature one is the pictured here with all the veins and the lobes. And then the little inset is the spores on the backside that you'll find. And interestingly enough, this fern is edible and is actually fairly tasty. One of the interesting things about New Zealand plants is a number of them are called divaricating, particularly in shrubs. And divaricating means that they have very small leaves, and that the twigs are interlaced and they kind of zigzag. They're spread apart as white angles and dense, and then they often will have this sort of zigzaggy appearance. And there's a number of shrubs in the Coposma species they're all divaricating. And the theory behind this is that these evolved to combat overbrowsing, particularly of the moas, which are now, of course, extinct, but that they evolved in combination with browsing birds and the moas. And these coposmas are beautiful. They have the most amazing berries. There's that blue on the right and the left. There's red, but they also come in orange berries, red, black, white, purple. And most of the berries are edible, maybe not that great, very tasty, but there is one that's very important to the Maori called the karamu, which has these orange berries, which is very productive. And it is a vital plant for the Maori. They used it to treat kidney and bladder issues and some other things, but the berries are edible and you can make a nice jelly with them. And then the barks and leaves have been used for dyes and tea substitutes. Next, we'll move on to vines. There are lots of vines in the forest. One that we saw all over the place, particularly in on the North Island and the temperate rainforest, is something called supplejack, or the carriole, which is actually an edible vine. And if you find a tender end, and you cut it off, and it's like, it tastes like, sort of acts and tastes like celery, I thought. Some people say like carrots, but those are just thick tangles of vines throughout the forest. An interesting couple of vines are they're rattas. There's a climbing ratta, and in the middle there's that scarlet ratta because of the brilliant red flowers. And the scarlet ratta has those attractive, they're actually stamens, those red stamens, and they I'm sorry, I'm getting confused. Actually go back to the climbing ratta. Which interestingly enough, they were used for construction, so they could make ropes, use their tools, and then they could even use some of the inside of it for treating wounds and colds. Quite an amazing and very useful vine. There is another, these are all on the Metrosideros, if I say that right, species. And then there is also another one called a northern rata, which is also a Metrosideros, but that actually becomes a tree. It starts out as an epiphyte, becomes a tree when it sends down its roots again, and becomes actually quite a large tree. So fascinating, weird plants that transform as they get older. The understory, one of the things I noticed walking through the forest is that you don't see a lot of flowering herbs, very few. One understory plant that is quite striking is the New Zealand begonia, or also called the Paratanafa, which has these lovely bronze colored leaves as well as green, very ragged edges, beautiful, and you'll see large stretches of the understory growing along there. The other thing that you'll see a lot, of course, are mosses. There's some very unique and interesting shaped mosses, like the umbrella moss. And then I was fortunate enough to actually find a green hood orchid, which I thought was gorgeous. Sorry, it's a little blurry, but beautiful understory. And that I found, actually, that was on the South Island where we found that one. I'm going to move on to shrubs. This first one's quite interesting at Rangiora, also called Bushman's friend. And it's a friend because it is soft and fuzzy on the underside and makes great toilet paper. It also was used by the Maori for medicinal poultices, for skin infections. The Maori could also leave signals as the leaves were turned over. They're very distinctly white, and so they could use it as sort of a signaling leaf. These, however, the leaves are poisonous, so not to be eaten. Unlike the kawakawa, the New Zealand pepper tree, these are actually edible. And one thing that really likes them are these caterpillars. And so you'll see the kawakawa all over the North Island in the forest, and they will all the leaves will have these little holes. And that's because there's the caterpillar, that's their only food. And so they don't actually hurt the plant or kill the plant, but they will take little bites all over it, and very distinctive when you see it. It sort of tastes like lettuce. It's not amazing. And then the flowers there you see are new. They actually will turn a bright orange and really pretty. And I threw this slide in because Hebes are so amazing, and there's Hebes everywhere in New Zealand. They have incredible flowers and just such a distinct form. There are over 100 species of Hebes in New Zealand, which I think is maybe more than anywhere else in the world. Um, then a couple more shrubs here. The Tarepo, or New Zealand Gloxinia, has these lovely red flowers. And one of the things that not 100% true, but a lot of flowers on the trees and shrubs in New Zealand tend to become small and white and very indistinct, and they are pollinated by insects, moths, things that don't see color. But the birds in New Zealand do see color, and so a lot of times the red flowers will be pollinated by the birds. So I thought was pretty cool. So there's some very unique and beautiful birds in New Zealand, tui, bellbird, and stitchbird, and they will be attracted to that red color. On the right here is a mingi mingi, and it's a shrub, grows up to about 5 meters tall. It has red or white berries, and the Maori would use this plant for teas, to help with respiratory issues, headaches, and so forth, as well as the leaves for poultices and skin infections. Moving to trees, the lancewood is a fascinating tree shrub. It starts off, the pictures here are of the juvenile form, and you'll notice they have these long sawtoothed leaves. And then as they get older, those leaves will shrink. And I've got a picture of comparing the sizes of the leaves, the very long one, the juvenile, and a shorter edged one is the adult form of the plant. And that is called, for those of you who don't know, and I didn't know when I looked it up, the term is heteroplasty, which is when they have juvenile leaves are different than the adult leaves. And I'm going to talk about, there's a few more examples as we go along. I'd like to mention the lancewood is such a unique, interesting tree, but the wood is really hard. And so it made for great, very useful for fishing spears, walking sticks. The Maori also would pound the leaves and make, they would yield these long, like hairs for brushes, so they could use them for painting. They were also woven, and then as a food source, a number of birds would use these as for food. The riwa riwa, or New Zealand honeysuckle, has these amazing red flowers, long stamens, again, different sized leaves for the adult and the juvenile form, which is one of the reasons why when I was out trying to identify things and it kept getting confused, I realized it's because the leaves, you see one tree and it has these small leaves, and then you see another tree or another bush. It's got these long leaves, and like, is that the same thing? And yes, they are. The Riwa Riwa is actually a very tall tree, goes about 30 meters. The flowers produce a great, wonderful nectar, and for the native birds, but the wood is used for construction, and then the bark was used for medicine. And then this is one of my favorite trees we found. I saw this mostly on the South Island. I think maybe it's also on the North. It's a tree fuchsia, also called a kotu kotuku. And on the left, you can unfortunately, it's not a great picture, but it shows the fuchsia flower. And one of the interesting things about this is that the flowers are kind of greenish before they're pollinated. And once they are pollinated, mostly by birds, they turn red, which supposedly tells the bird that to stop coming. The tree fuchsia has this beautiful, very shaggy bark. and they have berries that taste like grapes. So very tasty. And then the pollen, the blue, there's pollen of the flower is blue and was used in cosmetic pigment, as a cosmetic pigment. And the bark was used for dyeing. Um, and yeah, I could keep going on that. But anyway, very cool, beautiful tree. There's one species of native palm in New Zealand, and it's the Nikau palm. And it is quite distinctive and very essential to the Maori. They use the long fronds for thatching of their roofs. They would use the leaves for wrapping their food, for carrying. The berries are edible, and as well as the inner shoots could be eaten, and even the flowers could be eaten. And you could sort of see the very distinctive palm trees and tree ferns in the picture on the right. A large tree, very distinctive, is the rimu, or the red pine. This again has the long, sort of shaggy, weeping leaves, if you will, for the juvenile. And then as the tree matures, those leaves get very short and more spiny. You can see it grows quite tall. Try and get one picture of what it looks like when it's fully grown. It can grow up to 50 to 60 meters tall. It's also very long lived, 800 to 900 years old, and has that very distinct foliage. It's a very durable wood, and that was used for building the canoes called wakas by the Maori. It had medicinal purposes as well. And then the heartwood was used for pigment for tattooing. The Remo held a spiritual significance to the Maori and would ward off evil spirits. So keep that in mind. Another tree called whitewood or maho has these beautiful blue berries, which were used for tattoo ink. And they're also edible. They could be used for jelly, making sort of a sweet sour jelly. And then, yeah, various other medicinal uses as well from the leaves. The fa, in the Maori language, WH is an F, by the way. So fa, the cork tree, is very light wood, and Maori used it for their fishing floats. I threw this slide in, or a couple of these slides in, from the tree daisy, not because there's any particular Maori significance to them, but they're just such unique, strange trees, fairly small. The flowers are big bunches, but when you looked at each of the individual flowers, they do look like daisies. And there's a number of species in New Zealand of tree daisies, olearia, which are beautiful. This is the rakawa, and I put this in here again to show that example of the heteroplasty, the juvenile leaves, the adult leaves. One of the I was looking up trying to understand why this would be, and there's a couple of reasons. Would be that the leaves would be larger in the juveniles because they'd be able to capture more light in a low light understory environment. And then while the adults grew, they would have better sunlight, so they'd be able to tolerate the higher sun and higher wind and less and water loss by having the smaller leaves. This is a puta weta, or marble leaf. This is beautiful marbled leaves, and what in the Maori word is the last sort of syllable is weta, and weta in Maori means insect, and it often refers to these giant grasshoppers that they have in New Zealand. That is a real insect in that person's hands. They're crazy big. So the plant itself, The leaves were used for burns, boils, the berries for food and drink, the bark for dyes and fishing gear, and the wood for tools and games and even poi. So again, a very useful tree that the Maori relied on. The mako mako or wineberry has more these purple berries that could be made into a drink or eaten straight. Uh, they were supposed to be very good for arthritis and treating um, sore eyes. The manuka are the broom tea trees, a kind of large spindly tree, and with these very small um, little needles. And again, you'll notice that the flowers are very small and white. They have an amazing scent, so they attract insects rather than birds. And the Manaku is known for its amazing nectar, beautiful smelling, and you'll even find on the shelves that they a honey that's made from the Manaku trees. That also, I guess, with the broom tea tree, uh, the Maori would make tradition would use the tree for fevers, colds, wounds, digestive issues, and a sedative by taking the leaves and making a tea. And but it's really it's most known for its honey. That the bees use it for the honey. The other thing is there are parakeets, kariki parakeets. And they use the leaves of the manaku and to rid themselves of parasites. They apparently ingest it, chew it, and then mix it with their gland oils and put them on their feathers and helps them with their bug problems. This is I can try and say this, pohutukawa, also known as the Christmas tree, because it blooms in December and has these beautiful red flowers. And you'll see this all over New Zealand in the urban areas. They've been planted, but it is a coastal tree primarily. And it has these shaggy broom, I guess they're actually aerial roots, and they kind of hang down like straw brooms. Can grow quite large, as you can see. And this is actually also a metro Sedera species, again, endemic to New Zealand. A lot of these trees are threatened by the pests, like the Australian opossum and other things that will eat the leaves till it can, and will kill it. These flowers also produce a really sweet nectar, and which you can be consumed directly or again made into honey from the bees. And finally, no slideshow can be complete without some reference to the Lord of the Rings. This is Hobbiton, which is a unique flora and fauna, and it's actually a delightful little tourist attraction. So you can see little hobbit holes in the ground. And that is it. 7:38. Thank you for listening. Haurara. And I'm happy to take a couple questions.
Thank you, Virginia. I don't see any questions in the chat, but if you have any, feel free to put them in there now. We can take a couple minutes to answer any of those.
Yeah, or we can move on to Paul and save questions for the end.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah.
Okay, so I need to stop sharing.
It's amazing, Virginia. Thank you so much. You're making us all hungry, I think.
I know, lots of food there. Okay, I think I'm off.
Well, Paula's getting set up. sorry, Chelsea, if you caught that one. There is a comment or question in the chat about did you have any guides or resources that you found helpful? So maybe you and Paul can cover those at the end.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, go ahead if you got one on the tip of your tongue there.
Well, I did buy the Nature Guide to the New Zealand Forest, which was super helpful. And it's very broad, but it talks to a lot of these evolutionary adaptations were in there and discussed, and so really helped me kind of confirm my identification, which I got a lot of the IDs from Seek, but then I was like, was that right? So I wanted to make sure.
Paul, are you out there?
Yeah, it looks like maybe he's having some technical difficulties. Potentially. Paul, if for some reason, yeah, you're not able to connect, let us know in the chat. Or feel free to log off and log back on.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason or other, my program has disappeared off the screen and I can't get it to pull up. So I'm not quite sure why that is happening. Let me just see if I share whether it shows up or not here first. And if not, then okay, so share. Okay, here we are, I think. Let's see here. Okay, so there's the picture of the let's see. Nope, that's the picture of my screen. I may have to reboot.
You're almost there. And down at the bottom, you don't have the window open.
I don't see it down at the bottom. And when I click on the presentation software, everything just goes blank. So it's again that blank issue I was having earlier. Erg.
Yeah, maybe if you think it would be helpful to reboot it and jump back on.
Okay, let me do that, and then you'll have to reshare me. So just give me a minute here.
I guess we could take more questions for Virginia.
Yeah, happy if there's
Where?
I'll add my 2 cents. I have been to New Zealand, but only to visit the Science Museum in Auckland and to collaborate with the entomologists there. But yes, New Zealand has many parallels with Hawaii and the rest of Polynesia. So the flora was familiar, and but totally unique in both New Zealand and Hawaii, with almost everything endemic and very isolated. Oh, yeah, very good presentation, Virginia. Loved it. But
Oh,
made
thank
it
you.
reminiscent of home.
Yeah, it is interesting. It has that sort of tropical feel, which is, even though it is not a tropical island, it's not
Yeah.
like Hawaii in terms of the temperature.
Well, I did a lot of playing in the snow in Hawaii, collecting insects on the snowfields. So yeah, so
Do you have those big giant grasshoppers?
we used to. There's records of one was as big as your clenched fist, but it went extinct in the 1890s, probably with the introduction of the roof rat.
Oh,
But then no specimens survived, unfortunately. But yeah, we have a couple of gigantic katydids, um,
oh,
but
okay.
not as big as the weta. But we have equally, both islands have just spectacular insect fauna and flora.
Yeah, yeah,
It looks
yeah. And of course, there's the kiwis and the other flying birds, which are quite
Yeah,
unique to New Zealand.
I had that chuckle that the New Zealand caprasma are edible because caprasma means shit in Greek, and that's what the plants smell like in Hawaii. And it's interesting
Oh,
that the both the English, the Hawaiian, and Greek name are all mean shit.
how funny! I didn't know that. That's great.
it looks like Willow
Cool.
question.
I
Willow.
I do have a question. And then, sorry, Kathy Pendergrass, I can't type right now very well. So I'm just going to ask, I heard, is it true that Wellington is about the same alternate 45th parallel on the other side of the world, and it's very similar to the Portland climate? Is that true?
I could look it up.
Did it look like
Wellington
that?
is very likely. It's probably the windiest city. It's way worse than Hood River.
Ah,
Constant wind.
I'll
But
take a look. I'll take a look and see if it is on the 45th parallel myself. But it's at the bottom of that other, it's kind of in between two massive landforms, so I could see how it'd be very windy.
yeah, it's on the south of the North Island, right on the coast between those. And yeah, just New Zealand, especially the South Island, is known for its winds.
Wellington is at 41 degrees south. I just looked at
Ah,
my New Zealand map.
So
I mean,
that's why
it's below
some
the
people
45th.
say, oh,
So
this,
it would be more like maybe Vancouver, BC.
uh, okay, rainy.
I do,
Paul,
Paul. Are you?
I'm here.
you need to rename yourself
Yeah, I
because
know.
I just tried and I named Chelsea Paul, and now I can't find the second Chelsea.
I
So
don't know why.
you do it.
Don't know why things are doing this. Okay. I'm ready if I think. Want me to share?
Launch. Yes.
Okay, can you see things?
We can. Yep.
Okay. I'm gonna launch in because unfortunately things goofed up here. Anyway, we visited New Zealand in January last year, 3-week tour hosted by Nature Trek, which is a British company, and the tour was Birds and Botany of New Zealand. And so it was, kind of like going into a place where, at least for me, I didn't know anything birds or plants or anything like that. And so anyway, I'm going to go ahead and try and continue here. We flew in to the North Island after about a 13, 14 hour flight, and it was basically a day and a half of travel. at least going, and arrived in Oakland and immediately got on the bus and traveled west to the Waitakere Ranges Regional Park, where we saw kauri trees. And then we did, a couple of days up on north of Oakland, and then traveled down to Lake Taupo and to the spent about a couple hours at the Puriora Forest Park, which I'll show pictures of, and then continued on that evening to Tongariro National Park. And there were places in between where we took a look at plants, but I haven't shown the places where the emphasis was mostly on birds. Then went to Wellington, where we were afraid that we weren't going to get across because of high winds. The straits had been closed for 2 or 3 days, and if we weren't able to get through, we might have to wait another 2 or 3 days because of the backup of traffic. But made it into Picton and went down next to Nelson Lakes National Park and spent half a day, then went up, spent a day up in Kahurungi National Park at Mount Arthur, which I'll show. Came back on another day, spent a day at Black Birch Scenic. Let's see if I can close this out. Scenic Reserve south of Blenheim, and then made a couple of stops and spent time up in Aoraki Mount Cook National Park. And then after a long day, came down and spent another afternoon up in the Kopawai Conservation Area, just south of Alexandra, a nice little town. And then again, after a long trip, spent a couple of nights in Te Anau and did some birding and botany up in Fiordland National Park. And so I'll kind of talk about these areas that I've highlighted in red here, kind of sequentially. Just before getting going here, I just want to mention, here's a graphic that shows the vegetation before and after people arrived. And this is, based on archaeology, geology, pollen samples, that kind of thing. You can see that most of New Zealand, at least in the low to midlands, was indigenous forest. If there's forest now, it's largely been replaced by weedy species like pines and things like that. And you can see now that much of the both islands is agricultural. I do want to point out that the in terms of climate, the upper part, kind of from about Oakland on north, is considered subtropical. And then again, the lowlands are more or less temperate, and then the mountains more extensively on the South Island are montane climates. And then, again, it's a little bit cooler down here on Stewart Island, although when we were there, it was probably like about 80 degrees. And so our first visit was to the Paringa Cascade Kauri forest, which has some of the most precious stands of old kauri trees on the island. It's an ancient coniferous tree, again from Gondwana land, as are the podocarps. The kauris can get to be about 50 meters high, about 5 meters wide, very straight wood. The wood being, the trunks being uniform in diameter, quite high up into the tree. They were cut for wood in the early 1900s and largely disappeared. The bark was also used for gum and varnish and paint and things like that. You can see the kauris up here. So here's a kauri up here. There's a few dead ones. A couple more here. These are podocarps, Remu, Takahari, that kind of thing. They're again ancient conifers, and then in a podocarp forest, you have quite a few herbaceous trees and shrubs and things like that. Let's see. Again, just a different view from the same area, looking at the kauri up above, one of the podocarp conifers, and then marvelous tree ferns and palms and cabbage trees and things like that along this area. I should mention at this particular place and a few others, it's walled off, double fenced, and so that mammals can't get in and kill birds and things like that. Of more concern for this particular place because there's Kauri. They're sensitive to microorganisms, molds and fungi and that kind of thing. So in order to come in, you stay on a boardwalk all entirely. Don't step off onto the ground. And at the entrance, there's a gate that you go through, and then it sprays desanitizing liquid all over your shoes. And I should mention that when you come into the airport in Oakland or the other international gateways at customs, they take a look at your boots and things like that to make sure they're clean and that kind of thing, trying to keep invaders from coming into the island. Again, just a few pictures of podocarps here on the left along the stream, tree ferns, lots of sedges and grasses and things like that on the ground. An aerial view of, I think these are silver ferns. And here's an example of our group, which consisted of 8 Brits. There were 5 Americans in our New Zealand tour guide Mark, who was quite good here at the Waikiri Kauri Forest. Stopping and taking a look up into the ferns. Here's an example of a Kauri. This one was alive that we saw. Again, note the very straight, thick bark going way up into the crown of the tree. And that's one of the reasons why it was so highly prized early on in settlement by Europeans, for building and shipbuilding, that kind of thing. Here's some silver ferns. Again, you identify because there's no dead fronds underneath here. Very, very impressive just to look up and see the sky through these, radiating fronds in these tree ferns. Here's one of the podocarps, which are large conifer trees from Gondwanaland during the days of the dinosaurs and maybe before. This is white pine and kind of has scaly bark. The leaves are kind of reminiscent of yews. A couple days later, we headed down to Taupo Lake and spent a night, and then visited the volcanic country, and then we took a side trip up into the Puriora forest and did a walk along the Rimu Walk, which features a bunch of Remo trees. And so here's an example of Rimu, which Virginia showed. You can see how tall and straight these are. These are, well over 100 feet tall, kind of, all like leaves, like you might find, this is it's very much like a member of the cypress family. Again, Virginia did a good job of talking about the epiphytes, and you can see the trees are just heavily covered. It's a subtropical. Well, I guess this is more montane, but it has that subtropical or tropical feel because of the epiphytes. Lots and lots of ferns. A person that enjoys ferns, mosses, lichens, it's like dying and going to heaven when you visit New Zealand, and just not enough time to show many of the ferns and lichens on this particular program. But Prince of Wales fern was common on the North Island. At the left here, kangaroo ferns, even more common. This is actually, again, a vine, as Virginia alluded to. Really cool color to the leaves and the vein patterns and so on. And she also showed us the hen and chicken fern, Pico Pico, which is an asplenium. And you can see, this is a close-up, you can see the little bulbils here, and these will drop off, and if they fall in the right spot, then they'll grow into a whole new plant. So it's a type of asexual reproduction. And again, one of the really attractive ferns, this is common haircut moss, which to me looks like a kind of a palm tree or whatever effect, kind of a stalk coming up and then the leaves splaying out horizontally. Found everywhere. This is on the drive between the Rimu and the into our next destination. And so this is Toto, and very, very common all over the place where there's, forest openings or fields or even up into the mountain areas. And so here's a tree fuchsia. So this shows you the fruits and the flower pollinated here already. They're decent sized plants. I think the first time I saw one of these was actually in the Royal Botanical Garden at Edinburgh in Scotland. And they actually grow those all year long. During the wintertime, they just stake them down, so they're kind of down across the ground, and then pile a bunch of leaves and things over them to keep them from getting frost damage and so forth. Not quite that cold here. We then visited a different part of the Peoria Forest and visited the Totara Walk. So the trails are called walks here. And so again, these are all podocarp trees up here, several different kinds of podocarp conifers, and then again an understory of herbaceous plants, more dense out on the forest edge, and then as you get into the forest, it opens up quite a bit. And on the hikes and things, in most cases, they may give you mileage, but more typically it's based on how quickly a fast person would walk. We were obviously quite a bit slower. Here's a totara, which is another podocarp conifer, ancient conifer. And so just several views of them along this particular walk. Note the shredded bark coming down. I believe this might be, a Schefflera relative pate, I think, but I could be wrong about that. Going into a new country and doing both a bird and botany class, it's like, your head is spinning trying to remember everything. And I try to take notes, but frequently I was behind because I go slow. More tree ferns here. And so here's a katote or soft tree fern. Note again the thin dried branches or fronds from the previous year here. Contrast that with the Wekipunga golden tree fern, which has wider dried fronds coming down as we walk along the path underneath it. And then again, I'm not sure exactly what this tree is, but again, note the epiphytes on this tree, and this is all moss. I think there was a spot where we punched our hands in on a low hanging branch, and you could just stick it in. It's just a big ball of moss. Then on later that afternoon to Tongariro National Park. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of the Maori name of the mountain there, but that's Mount Doom from the Lord of the Rings series there. And here's some Toto down here. And so we spent a day exploring in Tongariro National Park. We did a walk, and so Susan and I elected to walk a trail up to Taranaki Falls while most of the group did the lower section, and then we joined up here and then walked back together to lunch. And you can go all the way up to an overview to Upper Tama Lake. Here's the big walkabout that people talk about around Tongariro National Park. No volcanic activity that particular day. But I should mention that this year, last year when we visited here, the weather was perfect. It was sunny every day, and almost every day, and not too windy. And but this year they've had massive flooding all over the islands and fires here in this area. We may not have been able to visit this area this year if we'd been there this year. Along our track on the at Tongariro, we passed through mountain beech forests, and the beech trees here are basically the leaves are about thumbnail size, and you're kind of looking at the leaf margins to identify the different kinds of beeches. Mountain beech being more montane. Here's a spreading green hood. probably the largest of the orchids that we saw. Here's a juvenile orchid back here. Lots of orchids that we saw in Tongariro National Park. Striped sun orchid, and striped because of the striping on the inside and to some extent the outside of the petals. Common sun orchid. This is Hatch's Thelomitra. Again, a lovely color. Green column Caladinia orchid. Saw a number of those. Lots and lots of swamp orchids. Beautiful critters. And we saw two kinds of sundews. This is the rosy sundew with the more spatulate leaves. Again, these are sticky and, capture insects for, feeding upon, getting nutrients from. And then we also saw one that had forked leaves, long, kind of bifurcated leaves along this trail. Constant companion in the park, in the forest, was the umbrella fern, quite attractive. I should mention that a lot of these plants that you're seeing are used in gardens, I think both in New Zealand as well as Great Britain and across the world. Here's one of my companions, Susan, who was with me, and so we were both birding and botanizing along the trail. So we're kind of transitioning out of the forest into the scrublands, and I'm going to go back here if I can. And up above here, this is all tussock grasslands up above. This is the manuka that Virginia was talking about that's used for making honey. All kinds of hebes, all kinds of cool shrubs. These are dracophyllums, dragon leaves, which range from, they can be a cushion plant all the way up to shrubs like these to trees. These are smaller podocarps here, ancient conifers. Getting a little bit higher, we got up to Taranaki Creek and looking up to Mount Ruapehu, which we would drive up to and then do a little bit of botany work the next day. Again, tussock grasslands. The white here is, is big groups of mosses. When we were coming up to them, we thought that they were vegetable sheep, but they're just big, 2 foot wide kinds of Racometrium mosses. Tussock grasses, these are 2 or 3 feet across and, 1 or 2 feet high. So this is red tussock as far as I can tell, and mid-ribbed snow tussock on the right, just all kinds of beautiful grasses, in the montane areas that we saw. And here's Inanga or thread-leaf dracophyllum. Unfortunately, I think there's like about 40 different kinds of dracophyllums, and I was having to rely on iNaturalist, and without a key, it's kind of hard to really know which is which. And I did get some verification from volunteers when I submitted these to iNaturalist, but we'll take them as pretty shrubs. Pinafore, Pimelia buxifolia, has kind of that boxwood type leaves. It's a slow shrub with these really fuzzy tubular flowers, including fuzz all over the outer surface of the petals. I really like this particular shrub, dwarf mingimimgi, whatever. Anyway, it's a beautiful shrub. I like the coloration on the edge of the leaves. And then one of the Veronicas, Ruapehu ibi. I'm not sure if this is endemic to the park or not. Getting lots and lots of ibis now, Veronicas, on both islands. Later in the day, we took another side trail up a little bit higher onto the mountain and had views back over the tussock grasslands. Possibly this is that mountain beach, and again, hebes and tussock and dracophyllums here in the foreground. Didn't get much higher because a thunderstorm came by a couple minutes later and we were out in the open. And so the next day we did venture up to about 1,500 meters on Mount Ruapehu, just below the ski area. You can see the road going uphill at the left to the ski area. And so these are all mosses here, Rhacometrium mosses, which we do have here. The choices up here are Rhacometrium pruinosum or Rhacometrium lanuginosum, which actually we have over at Catherine Creek in the gorge. And then all these little herbaceous plants. And we were just a little bit too early for a lot of the flowering plants. And because we had a lot of traveling to do that day, we didn't have a lot of time at the area. But here's a close-up of the frosted moss, which I think is what this Rhacometrium moss is, on the left, with little plants taking advantage of protection from cold weather popping up through the moss, and then a mountain harebell, Wallenbergia pygmaea. Again, a cute little plant. Euphrasias, eyebrights. These are showy. These are these are at least finger size blooms, and wasn't able to find many in bloom, so not real great pictures. A really cool Raulia, um, volcanic plateau Raulia, with that kind of white outer edges, to the kind of the brownish leaves, and then some flower buds haven't opened yet. A couple of days later, we'd crossed over to the South Island and took a long hour and a half, 2-hour drive with a stop to get fresh blackberries and raspberries. It was fruit season there, and did a day-long hike up along the Mount Arthur walk. And so they have really nicely maintained trails in the national park. We actually talked to one of the trail guys who works for the park, who was up doing some maintenance on the hut. You'll notice up here at the arrow, there's a metal box, and that's an mammal trap. And so regularly spaced along pretty much all trails, and then out into the woods everywhere are these traps to trap stoats and rats and cats and whatever else has escaped onto the island. It's just impossible to gate off big wildlands to keep mammals out, so they have to keep trapping. A little bit further up the trail, again, probably mountain beaches, but could be something else. A cool lancewood tree daisy, Olearia lacunosa, because it was dark and semi-rainy. Unfortunately, this didn't blow up real well, but here's a nice image here of the flowers with the leaves. Again, a shrub about 10 to 15 feet high. We did have a little bit of time to get up into the alpine zone and tussock grasslands, and saw several types of spear grass or Spaniards. These look like yuccas, but they're actually members of the parsley family. And they're like yuccas. You don't touch any of these little projectiles sticking out here because they are sharp and go deep into you. There's two speargrass species here. The one with the kind of more glaucous leaves is Acephala glaucescens. And so again, it's a parsley. And over here, I was told that this is fierce speargrass, Acephala ferox, but it could be Acephala colensoi. Again, one of the problems being a visitor and not having advantage of looking at keys and things like that. Again, lots of hebes and things not yet in bloom up here, up high. Salmisias are the daisies of both islands, and there's, I know, a whole bunch of different forms or species. This is mountain daisy, and um, again, a cool plant. I really like the leaves here. And then this is mountain foxglove, Ericia macrophylla. Very, very pretty. It started raining by this particular point. And so this is actually in the plantain family and is related to foxgloves. Distantly, though, different genus. More some Salmisias. This one, I'm not 100% sure on what it is. doesn't have the thicker leaves of Spectaculus, but the iNaturalist people that I had communication with said that on Mount Arthur there are a bunch of or there's some Salmisia spectabilis cotton daisies that have much narrower and smaller leaves. We'll see regular size Salmisia spectabilis here in a couple minutes. And then here's Dahl's mountain daisy, Salmisia dahlia, much bigger, bigger leaved, showy daisy-like plant in the Asteraceae. Another nice orchid, bird orchid, Chiloglottis cornuta. So here's the flower up here. Again, I'm guessing that it was raining, and so I had my big DSLR camera hidden under my rain gear for protection, and so I was probably using my cell phone. So again, harder to get a good clear image. Here's an odd-leaved orchid, Aporostylus bifolia, cute little guy. And then mountain tauhinu. Most of the time we saw tauhinu as kind of creamy buds, flower buds. We'll see this, in a few minutes again with creamier buds and the flowers open. But I thought this was a really cool variation of that. Again, up in the alpine zone. Okay, so the next day we went in, had to get new tires. I should mention that on this last hike to Mount Arthur, I don't believe you can get to that easily this year because the road washed out because of floods last summer. So again, lots of weather-related issues in the New Zealands here this past year. Anyway, we went into Millennium, had to swap out tires that were getting bald on the bus, and because we were going off into really wildlands in some cases. And so we took a long, winding road up this really windy, scary road a bus shouldn't be on, and ended up in the Black Birch Scenic Reserve, which is probably one of the driest mountain ranges in New Zealand. Here's another mountain range off beyond here, about 10 miles away, with taller mountains, and then Kaikoura, which some of you know of, will be down someplace over here on the coastline. So we're not really too far from the coast. Let's see here. These white blobs that you see here, those are vegetable sheep, which we'll show in a couple of minutes. Some tussock grasses, not a lot of them at this altitude. Some salmisias or mountain daisies. Just all kinds of wonderful things. And so our guide opened the doors, and we scattered like a bunch of cats, and we're all over the place birding and looking at little montane plants. Here's a teeny Acephala, little spear grass, Acephala monroy. Probably this basal rosette is about as broad as my palm, and then it's actually going to seed, or it's got green fruits here at the moment. This is probably blue. Let's see here. Oh boy, I can't remember the name. We'll see it here in a second here. And then New Zealand strawflower, which is about 2 or 3 inches tall. Kind of a cool looking plant. Two different Salmisias. So these are Salmisia spectabilis. This is that same one that I showed you on Mount Arthur that had the smaller leaves. And then this silvery one, which is kind of cool, is New Zealand daisy, Salmisia vespertina. And this, I think, was the only ones that we saw. Okay, this is, now I remember the name. This is Raulia, blue Raulia. And then all kinds of cool lichens up on the rocks, and then cool montane grasses. Didn't have much time to put grasses into the images. Vegetable sheep. So this might be 2 or 3 feet, going this way and a foot or two across. And then you can see the individual flower heads. So these actually aren't flowers. This is a grouping of several flowers together. So these don't have the ray flowers that we associate with a lot of the daisies and so forth, but it's in that particular family. And then it's covered with these dense white hairs to prevent desiccation and UV damage and wind damage and so forth. So pretty cool plants to see. So here's the blue vegetable sheep, or blue Raulia. So here's what it looks like this is maybe a centimeter or two thick, no more than an inch thick. And then here, this particular one has a few flower heads starting to open up on it. So cool little plants. And there's a fair amount of Raulias that we saw. And I believe, it's one of those plants that certain plant collectors like to have in their garden. Also turf mat daisy, which is a little bit different Raulia, told by the white, tips to the margins of the leaves. So kind of look like little starbursts or whatever. Again, this is in the Asteraceae daisy family, and here's one in bloom. A little orchid. And so we had one of our people was really interested in orchids, so I had to call her back down to take a look at this. Here's a little pollinator here. I'm not quite sure what that is, but saw these at a number of locations in high rocky spots during the course of our trip. And then here's the showy New Zealand harebill over here on the right amongst the lichens. Again, very common across, all elevation ranges across both islands. Then, spent a night in Kaikoura, did a pelagic birding trip out of Kaikoura, and then headed down to the Aoraki Mount Cook National Park, and the next day did a hike up the Hooker Valley Track. And so this is looking up at the high point in New Zealand on the South Island. This is the South Alps, excuse me, and Milky River coming out of a big lake up here. Lots of dracophyllums, and which are kind of more the reddish or brownish green humps out here. Tussock grasses are golden. Asaphyllas have the spikes, the spear grass, and so just a nice view. Unfortunately, when we did this trip, it was probably mid 80s, fairly high humidity, and everybody, I think, had a hard time on the trip because nobody had enough water. And so it was, was a fairly flat hike, but a lot of us did suffer a bit on this particular hike on this given day. And it was also the hike that had the most number of people that we saw at any given time on the trip. Most of the time, we saw just a few people, if any. Giant spear grass, Asaphyllis, got Thompsonii, again, glaucous leaves, really tall spikes. Large mountain daisy, probably the largest flower of the Celmicias that we saw, common along the upper, the last mile or so of the trail. Unfortunately, too late in the year to see the Mount Cook buttercup, sometimes called a lily, and Ranunculus alii. This is probably about 2 to 3 feet tall. So, it's a good sized buttercup, again, the largest in the world. A close up of the flowers of one of the dracophyllums or inaka. You'll find that the Maoris don't necessarily distinguish the names of different species of the same genus and just will use the same word. So over here we have a different inaka here with the flowers clustered together as opposed to a little bit more spread out. And then this was a spot where we saw a few corum-bearing gentians, Gentianella corymbifera. No true gentians. These are gentian relatives. I believe these, this flower is probably about a quarter size. Pohuehue, creeping wire vine. So this is actually the fruit developing. Here's the flowers. So it's a spreading mat across the rocky ground. I thought this was a really lovely shrub, daisy bush, Olearia moschata, because of the kind of glandular, hairy, silvery, hairy leaves and stems. Kind of, size of a zinnia, that we might find in our garden shop. But, these bushes stand about 2, 3, 4 feet tall. This is a coin-leaved tree daisy, Olearia nummularia folia, stands up 3, 4, 5 feet tall. Flowers a little bit different than the last one that we saw. Again, a pretty shrub. A little teeny Veronica, Speedwell. This one's actually is still a little bit shrubby at the base, called decorative Parahebe Veronica decora. And then here's a glabrous green, smooth Raulia that we found up at the lake where we had lunch and then turned around. So did get a little bit of alpine plants here. Just another view. This is Mount Sefton, I believe, and um, tussock grasslands. You'd think, oh, pretty easy to walk through here, but it's really hummocky and ups and downs and thick grass and other plants in places. A couple days later, we went on down and packed our gear at the motel in Alexandra and drove up to the Kopawai Conservation Area, the Old Man Range. This is the Old Man here, and it's metamorphic. A lot of New Zealand is metamorphic, and I can't remember what the name of the mineral is here, but this is visible for 20, 30, 40 miles around. And this is, I don't know, about 2,000 feet or probably about 35, 4,000 feet, something like that. So this really reminded us of, the top of the Columbia Hills, some of the high ridges in central and eastern Oregon and Washington in terms of appearance. The ground is hummocky because of all the mosses and low plants, growing and building up soil. A few tussock grasses. We're just getting to the point where the tussock grasses can't grow this high. So it's a little bit higher than we were at Tongariro National Park. So here again, we get off the bus and scatter, and everybody is off looking at stuff. And so there's all kinds of salmisias here and all kinds of cushion plants that we'll show in a minute here. And so down below on the way up, we did see golden Spaniard, a different Acephala aurea. This is the smallest, height-wise of the Dracophyllums that we saw, cushion inaka. Kind of cool when it's in bloom. Again, up here at this altitude, plants were just starting. In fact, I think I checked the week before it had snowed up here, about 3-4 inches. So, and it's also a very dry area up on top, very arid montane area with high winds. Maori onion, Bulbinella angustifolia, quite pretty. Wavy-leaved Anisotoma, which is in the parsley family. So, related to our desert parsleys, but I don't believe they have any lomatiums down there. Several different kinds of Samisias. The common shrub mountain daisy. So it's kind of a shrubby base down here, leafy, and then, stems that, have single heads up above them. Common mountain daisy, Samisia gracilenta, with narrow leaves. And then this is a really attractive one here, Haas mountain daisy. And these are really wide, 3-4 inches across. And then, teeny guys here. This is the white cushion mountain daisy, Salmisia sessiliflora. And we didn't see these in bloom, but sticky mountain daisies with different kinds of leaves, kind of more elliptic, pointed leaves. Low-growing shrubs, purple-berried coprosma and creeping coprosma. Different colored berries that help identify them. And mountain snowberry, a Gaultheria. And as far as I could see, the Gaultherias had whitish berries in New Zealand. I can't vouch to say that that's entirely true, but most of them seem to. And then fair amount of purslines in the alpine areas. So this is related to our Montias and Claytonias that we have here in the Pacific Northwest. Another gentian embellidifolia, little gentian on the left, and another Orysia glandulosa, mountain foxglove on the right. Mountain club moss. So again, as I said, there's a fair amount of lichens and mosses and things like that. And this is one that I could identify down to species. So this is, related to our lycopodiums or more distantly to selaginellas that we have here in the Northwest. And then here's a large flowered Raulia or large flowered met daisy, Raulia grandiflora. These flowers being, I don't know, but somewhere between a dime and a quarter size. Quite attractive. Didn't find a whole lot of them in bloom. And then on the way down, we did see Buchanan's Hebe Veronica Buchanii. So here's a close-up picture over here on the right. This particular plant was probably about 3 or 4 feet across and about a foot tall, low growing because again of the desiccating cold winds there much of the year. And then kind of the last of our stops will be just a brief stop in Fiordland National Park. We didn't have a lot of time to do a lot of botanizing, did a lot of kind of like birding and botany at the same time, but a lot of birding. And so this is on our way to Milford Sound, looking down into the Hollyford Valley. I don't know if you can see if you've got a big enough screen, but the hillsides have reddish color. And so Virginia did refer to that particular plant, which I'll show you here. And again, these are all glacial valleys, which end up on the coast out here, about 10, 15, 20 miles downstream. And so here's the reddish plant I was referring to, Southern Rata. And for those of you that have been to Hawaii, if you are familiar with Ohia lehua, it's in the same genus. So, related. And both the Ohia and, the Ratas are a little bit, I guess, having some difficulty in terms of disease and issues with, survivability, loss of conservation status. Mountain beech. And so these are big trees. So we were out on a trail and which featured the beeches, and so quite impressive to stand alongside these. These are quite buttressed, which I didn't really show very well. And then over here on the right, we have again the Tauhinu mountain cottonwood with the flowers open. If you remember earlier, I showed you one that had the kind of more the coral-like buds. And wrapping up here, we'll leave Hebe on the left at the tunnel, and over here subalpine Hebe, close to the tunnel on the way to Milford Sound. And here I'm along the trail along one of the road to Milford Sound with a friend that I've made, little South Island robin. And Susan had reminded me that this was actually one that somebody had befriended and had in their possession for a while, and so it was used to people, and so it actually came up and was hanging around my foot, a little bit too close for me to get a good close photo of, but she got a decent picture. They're pretty tame animals, though. And one of the reasons why it's necessary to get rid of or keep cats and dogs and possums and things like that from being wild on the island, because there's a lot of animals that are not historically habituated to carnivores. So anyway, wrapping things up, we did a nature trek tour, and as I said, it's a British company, and so they have just hundreds of trips that are botany oriented, birds and botany, mammals and botany, whale trips, butterflies, dragonflies, going all over the world. I want to do them all. And we were led by our leader was a New Zealander who was quite familiar with the area. He was also the Audubon equivalent of the national, for us, national Audubon leader for a number of years. And so he runs a tour website, a tour company called Nature Quest. So while we were on our tour, he had birding tours out that were, kind of like jumping us, and we were meeting on trails on occasion. I should also mention that I used iNaturalist quite a bit. So I actually actually bookmarked on my travel laptop some iNaturalist sites that were specific to the areas that we were visiting, like the national parks, at least to get an idea of what it was that we were going to be seeing the next day or had seen that day. And then I used volunteers, submitted photos and got a few corrections on some of the plants. Still waiting on a bunch of them. Take lots of digital film because you're going to shoot up lots of digital pictures. And then I do want to thank all the American and British participants for this trip because we had a great time on a 5-hour drive. We were talking about in one country pants means underwear, and another it means pants. Another area it's means shorts or something like that. So we had all kinds of weird comparisons of the language and talking about where we came from. And I finished up with a photo of a couple of tui, beautiful robin-sized birds that you find on both islands all over the place. So I will take questions, and should I go ahead and stop the share?
Yeah. Yeah. My chat it has an error. So I don't know, Paul, if you can pull up the chat or Lisa.
Let's see here.
And I can't see them.
And Susan has been helping you answer some of the questions, but you're certainly can give your own.
So Kathy had a question. I don't know what I'm assuming this was a question before I started, but there's a lot of radiation, yes, of species in the Asteraceae, a lot of the ferns, blectums and aspleniums, and just a lot of the dracophyllums, they're isolated, and so they're able to diversify to all these different kinds of environments out there, much as they do other places in the world. But there, it's a lot more important because the New Zealand is separated from Tasmania and Australia and the rest of the world by quite a distance of water. Yeah. And as Susan said here, we were there in January. It was high summer. We had looked at the weather beforehand, and it was rainy for the weeks leading up, so we piled in a bunch of rain gear and stuff like that. Had rain on one hiking day, and basically it was just a shirt with a raincoat over, and then an umbrella, to stay dry. Really didn't have much impact. Stayed warm enough. In fact, it was too warm on any sunny day. And for coming from the northern hemisphere in the wintertime, it was a bit of a shock to step off the plane into tropical weather. So I'm wondering Lisa, what were you talking about? Are there plants like these in South Africa?
Well, just in general, like you were talking about some of the similarities in Hawaii. And I'm just wondering with the whole Gondwana land, having been together and the relative, latitude and.
Yeah, but for the most part, it would be Australia, New Caledonia, Tasmania, because of their proximity and splitting off, later.
Mhm.
In terms of like the Kauri, the only tree that I could find that we would be familiar with, and it's not even endemic to the northern hemisphere, would be the monkey puzzle tree that's related to the Kauri.
Right, and that's in Chile.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of podocarps in South America.
Okay. Yep. Didn't know that. And then Virginia asked about the orchids. We found most of them up on Tongariro during our day there. Just happened to hit it right where they were in bloom. We found a few elsewhere, that were common. But I don't know if we were there at the wrong time or, in many cases it was a lot drier. Those orchids that we were seeing were either in fairly moist forest on Tongariro or in fairly wet conditions, that some of them are growing right amongst the sundews. Any other questions?
Did you just say you saw sundews?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, we saw 2 species of sundews at Tongariro.
is that something that happens all over the world? I didn't know they were.
There's some that like we've seen sundews in South Africa on Table Mountain, and
Hmm.
they're bigger and showier, bigger flowers, and so that it's they're found all over the world. So evidently, an old enough lineage to spread.
Oh, well, there's one species in Hawaii as well, and it's
Uh-huh.
close to, if not the same as the one in Alaska. And they have sticky leaves, so of course any bird that flies between islands is going to transport them. So yeah, the group gets around by dispersal quite readily.
Let's see here. We didn't see a lot of. I don't know that we saw any Scotch brim. Okay, so I
I,
didn't know. I didn't
I,
notice it, but
we didn't see it, but on my previous trip, I was there in November 2012, and it was blooming everywhere. It's worse than here.
uh-huh.
Away.
And the lupins that you see, especially down near the Aoraki Mount Cook area, those are weedy. Those are Pacific Northwest Russells or what have you. And they have they're trying to correct the problem, but at least in wild areas, but they have a terrible problem with non-native pines that were introduced for the lumber trade. And um, you as I showed in the map before, at the beginning, the North Island, the forests were largely cleared, and then of the native podocarps and Kauri, and replanted with Monterey pines and, oh boy, Norfolk pines and things like that. And it was real interesting. Our guide, being familiar with the island, to save time, he would cut across because no highway goes directly from point A to B. So he would cut across country. And so he drove mountain roads through clear cuts and things like that. And it was just, you know, very interesting to see, their management of the timber trade up there. Yeah, lots of lodgepole pine too.
Can I ask, do you think that they're doing a decent job of preserving, conserving different habitat types and making sure that they're holding on to their species diversity?
I think there's an attempt. I mean, they're probably in some cases doing a better job. They've fenced off areas, as I'd mentioned. The smaller preserves, which could be several square miles if it was on a isthmus or peninsula or whatever, to keep mammals from coming in. Trying to remove invasives. In some sort of a manageable form. Um, the um, timber conifers, that's a different problem. And much like here, the government recently became conservative, and so they're more industry oriented,
Right.
making money. So I can't, it was just the first year, I believe, of their reign, I guess you might say. And I was impressed by, the things that they were doing. But that's something that I don't know enough about.
Okay. Thanks.
So
They
real
need you to
quick,
go down, and they need Kathy to go down and do
yeah.
some wetland mitigation.
Restoration.
Yeah, Paul, that's my understanding. They were doing, I know many of the conservation biologists there and entomologists, and they were doing a very good job, and they had a pretty good program plan worked out. But the latest government change has shifted the priorities somewhat. It'll be interesting to see how it pans out because the conservationists are still quite active down there.
Yeah, it was my understanding that the conservation was, was still pretty active, and they have lots of volunteers, and plus, a pretty good conservation, public government conservation group, I guess you might say, it's department.
Yes.
On Facebook, once you click on a cute whale or a plant or something like that that's from the area, then all of a sudden you're inundated with all kinds of things, and a lot of it is at least for me, is conservation oriented, which is fine because I like that kind of stuff. But um,
One of their pluses is they the native indigenous Maori I have joined in with the conservation movement. They recognize that this is part of their culture. The
yeah,
biodiversity is part of their culture, and so they're also active on it. Um, and they're welcomed into the conservation society, which is quite heartening.
That's appropriate. I just had a question. It's Willow here. We sure heard a whole lot about sheep for many years. Are they off the landscape? I didn't see any.
there is a transition. Susan and I had a talk with this with a couple of our other members that were with us. We had four NPSO Portland chapter members, Susan, myself, Lou, I don't know if she's still online here, and then Melanie, who was our um, person in charge of the money for a while, back in the 90s. And so we had the conversation about sheep the other day. And so, with synthetic wool, there's not as much need. And so they're finding that the wool down low at low elevation is not as high quality as that in the mountains. And so, the sheep that are raised at low elevation, they shear them and get rid of the wool by burning or whatever. And then the sheep go to, are slaughtered and go to, the food trade, shipped overseas. Up higher, they have, still have the big sheep tracks or the sheep ranches. And so, they're getting the denser, nicer wool for the nice um, wool sweaters and things that you see, the caps and things.
Merino wool.
There's there's a lot of conversion of sheeplands to dairy cattle, and then
Great.
that they're actually take the milk and then condense it down to dry it and powder it, and that again is easier to ship worldwide than um, so
But concerning the sheep who were there 150 years ago, isn't that part of the reason all the invasive plants came in?
Yeah, that that in order the tussock grass is too coarse for sheep grazing and cattle grazing, and so they basically burned and plowed the grasslands, or when they cut the forest, then you know converted to agriculture, and so of course disturbing the ground then introduces an opportunity for weedy species to come in, whether intentionally, by being planted and then escaping, or just coming in on a ship inadvertently on somebody's clothes, or that kind of thing. And of course, manure then spreads it around as the animals eat it and then move around.
So I have my notes from our trip because our guide did give us kind of the lecture on agriculture on one of our long bus rides. And he said there are 300 sheep stations that raise merino wool, and the government wants to retire the sheep leases for water retention. And they're leasing the lower regions that used to have sheep are now becoming vineyards or pine forests. So they are trying to cut back on the number of sheep on the landscape. And really, the only sheep of any value are the ones at high elevations that produce merino wool. And yeah, we were talking about the fact that he said that sheep raised in the lower elevations. Their only value is mutton, which is sold into the Middle East, where people eat a lot of sheep there. And they burn the wool because the wool has no monetary value. So you can see there's not a lot of economics in sheep like there used to be before synthetic materials came along to compete with wool.
So there's a question here about efforts to replant, restore Kauri forests. I believe yes. Again, that's somewhat complicated in that the forest is fragmented, and again you have this disease that um, easily gets on them and eventually kills the tree. We did see a few trees that were dead on our first day. Um, so. Um, yeah, there's an attempt to do that, but that's I don't know on what kind of a scale that's being done. You know, probably again kind of a limited scale. It's more it's more at this point trying just to restore the existing forests that have them to more of a natural state. Um, getting out weedy stuff and then replanting where they can. And I'm not sure how slow growing these are.
Thanks for the background on that.
Yep. I should mention that, if you're going, really, we had to book this probably about a year in advance because it's popular and it's held every 2 years. So there's going to be another one of these next year. So you'd probably wanted, if you were interested, go check it out. Fairly expensive to go to New Zealand and to do a trip. Um, food and lodgings and things were great. As I said, our trip participants were really good. Enjoyed having them along on the trip. Um, but we ended up having booking and then had the flight from Portland to Los Angeles change time of departure from here, and so we then fortunately discovered that far enough in advance and had to rebook. So we went to Los Angeles and sat in LAX for about 7 or 8 hours, and we had to get our bags because it was advised that we don't keep our bags back in storage where they could get pilfered. So it was kind of a bit of a drag for that. And then, the plane leaving LAX was late, so that almost made us late for our meeting our group. And they're on a schedule. So, my advice would be, if at all possible, go a day early or even a couple days early and acclimate to the time zone because during a 14-hour flight on a jet, it's pretty hard to, some of us could sleep, but I sure didn't. And I know most of our group didn't sleep very well in flight. And most of the Brits were, went and either stayed overnight in Singapore and then came down that morning, or they came to Oakland and stayed a couple of days before joining up with the group. And they were well refreshed and ready to go. And the birding, yes, we saw 90 plus species. Maybe I think I had 94, 95. And so while, that's kind of what Susan and I do is we look at plants, but we also are busy doing an eBird list. And Melanie, who's with us, is usually doing, looking at dragonflies and butterflies and fungi. And Lou is looking at rocks. And so we have a diverse group. And so we're usually doing a whole bunch of things, and that kind of slows us down a little bit. So we were frequently at the tail end of the group.
I'm not sure how you can bird and also be identifying flowers. Aren't you? You must have a neck ache by the time that's over.
Yeah. At least the flowers there, most of the plants were at least bigger and easier to see. A lot of stuff we're looking at here, tiny little annuals, and my eyes are blurry after an hour or two. A lot of the birding that we did was by sound. So we were, I had Merlin going, I had eBird going. So I was making a list, and Merlin would identify some things. Merlin doesn't work real well in New Zealand, they don't have enough recorded songs yet for everything. And but a lot of times because we were behind, I could pish and I could get some of the small birds to come, and I'd be mobbed by a mob of wren tit sized birds, or bush tit, excuse me, bush tit sized birds. So it was pretty cool. And then the pelagic trips were really good.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Paul and Virginia, both for presenting this today. And if there are other questions in the chat, feel free to, we can answer those now. But otherwise, we want to thank everybody else for being here and participating tonight as well. And yeah, I think this is a good time that we can turn on our audio and video. And if we have questions, feel free to ask those now. Otherwise, yeah, we can kind of have some discussion. On social time.
Paul, it looks like there was one about the honey, and you said it a different way than we say it here in the States. We say manuka, right? And what do they say?
Well, I said Manuka too, but
I think
I
it's
don't know.
Manuka, but
Yeah.
Manuka is what we called
that
it in Hawaii.
Yeah,
It's an invasive weed in Hawaii.
Yeah, in the store, I didn't get a chance to go into the stores, but all the little curio shops or whatever would have like little jars of the honey. The pronunciation, the Maoris may have a different pronunciation than us
Yeah.
anglicized people, and again, there were, that was one of the topics of our trips, as I mentioned, is how were words pronounced differently and what was the meaning, that kind of thing.
They're probably imported bees.
Yeah, I would make a
Producing
guess.
honey.
I'm
think so.
guessing imported bees. It's a long ways for bees to fly over, windy oceans to get to New Zealand.
Yeah, I'm guessing just like here, European honeybees were imported to New Zealand a long time ago.
Yeah,
I think
they
that's
also
true.
introduced the British bumblebee to New Zealand and to pollinate the clovers. Introduced clovers,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
so
oh.
now the British bumblebee is a real problem, both in New Zealand and in Tasmania.
Oh,
Yep.
Is that one of
interesting.
the plants that they brought in agriculturally then? Is the
Yep,
clover?
clover, yeah,
Mm.
along with the lupins, as forage for cattle and sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, I found that it's a fun little website that gives the pronunciation for all the Maori words. So, which is helpful because they're hard to pronounce.
Yeah. Yep. Not enough time to practice all of the pronunciations.
Did either of you run into villages of Maoris? I understand that they tried to hang on. They don't have reservations. They tried to hang on to some of their villages, though. Isn't that correct?
Um, our particular group did not, there were mentions of villages off here or there along our route. And again, we weren't in town, we were in resort areas. So, we'd spent, a couple hours in Blenheim, just a little bit of time in downtown Oakland, and a couple other towns. The other issue was that it was summertime, and so across a lot of New Zealand, everybody takes off for the summer. Things close down, and people are gone out of the towns and off doing car caravanning or car camping or hiking or that kind of thing.
Or traveling elsewhere
Yep,
out of the
true.
country. Yeah, so January is like our August there or our July. Everybody was gone on vacation. The government was shut down. We stopped at a coffee shop in downtown Auckland to pick up our lunches at this bakery, and there was nobody on the streets. It was like totally deserted. It was a ghost town because everybody's on vacation. Christmas starts their vacation, and then
Yeah.
everybody takes a month off. So I think people go out of the country to visit family elsewhere in the world or travel or go on vacation themselves. So school was out. And the other thing about this trip is we were going from dawn till dark, and we didn't have time to go do any kind of sightseeing on our own pretty much because some of our days were pretty long. Um,
Yeah.
How long was the trip?
3 weeks.
So 3 weeks solid. Wow.
Yeah.
Yep. And it was over like in 2 days. It was that
Right.
fast.
Yeah.
It was good, but it was a lot to see and a lot of, there was a bit of seat time on a couple of days, in the bus, and our had only one driver, one guide, and he did have to stop, and on a after a certain amount of time, and so we'd have a stop in a park or something like that, chance to go to the bathroom and explore around a little bit, and then we had probably about 5 day, 2 night stays at places, which allowed us to do laundry and so a lot of the places had coin operated machines. Susan and I were cheapskates, and we just, washed and dried, in our rooms, and hoped it was dry with it, but before we took off for the next leg.
Right.
Yeah, you had to
Then,
plan it and do laundry on the first night of a 2 night stay.
yeah,
So I had mapped out the whole itinerary, figure out what are the places when I can wash my socks or my shirts or whatever. But
Right.
yeah, I was just looking at my notes here because I've been going day by day through the trip, and um, the Milford Sound day was a really long day. We got back to the hotel, had dinner, crashed into bed. The next morning, my note said breakfast was at 6 a.m. We had to leave at 6:30 because we had to drive all the way down to Bluff to catch the ferry to Stewart Island. And so we were on this tight time schedule. So you don't get time to go see if there's a native village or anything because
Right.
we were covering a lot of ground on this trip. But I was really happy because I really wanted to get to Stewart Island. And we did get there. We did get to see the kiwi on Stewart Island. So that was a highlight.
But there's
Um,
no
Oh,
pictures of the kiwi.
Oh, well, see, kiwi are active at night.
Oh, really?
Oh.
So
yeah,
we
to
were
get a
out with,
good walk of the night in the middle of the night, looking at kiwi.
yeah. And so you use red lights because if you use a regular white light, it'll scare them and they run back into the bush. But
Mm.
they don't see the red lights. So we went out very quiet, and our guides had these big torches with a red light, and they knew exactly where the kiwi were. We could hear them calling and just watched them. And they actually came over, and one of them pecked Melanie's knee. They got that close to us. If we just stood still, didn't make any noise or move, they were just busy doing their kiwi thing all around us, but it was like in the middle of the night.
Huh.
And so, yeah, I don't have any good. I have some video I took with my cell phone that's not very good of red lighted kiwis.
yeah,
So down
Yeah.
there, would it be like Alaska where you have the midnight, the winter, no sun?
not
Or
not at
they're
that
shorter
latitude.
days?
No.
No,
Okay.
we weren't in Antarctica. New Zealand doesn't go that far south. They do have what they call their sub-Antarctic islands. So they have islands that are part of the country that are further south that are just like wildlife preserves. So they're for nesting seabirds and marine mammals. Um, and I suppose there are tours there, but that was beyond our trip.
Yeah.
Do you think
Yeah.
December might have been better? Would it have been better to be a little earlier than like July here?
It's
Um,
So
it's
that would be
it's
more like June here.
when I went in November, we had much worse weather than in January this trip. So I was at Milford Sound in November 2012. We went kayaking on Milford Sound in the rain. So we had all these layers of fleece and dry suits on, and we're out there paddling, and it starts raining, and the rain's blowing in your face, and you're going, I'm here in New Zealand having a good time. This time we went on the boat trip, the tour that goes down to the mouth of the Sound at the Tasman Sea and back, and it was like cruising in the sunshine. There was some cloud overcast, or it would have been a lot hotter on the boat. So I saw a lot of difference between November and January as far as weather. And I thought we had much better weather. As Paul said, we had one day of rain. That was at Mount Arthur. The rest of our trip, the weather was great.
Well, other than the second to last day where it rained, from Stewart Island up to, uh, up to our pelagic trip.
Yeah, but we were just riding in the
Yeah,
bus.
we were in the bus.
It didn't matter.
Yeah. I should also mention, long days. It was our tour guide did his best job as he could. Our group was such that, we were like the tour group's heaven or whatever. The tour guide's, piece of heaven, in that we were really interested, and we tarried a little bit too much, at each of our stops looking at things, and so he was always trying to make up time and kind of hurry us along, but be nice about it, and
Right.
Yeah, I think if I, knowing better now, I would have wanted to stay over an extra day at Dunedin.
Yep.
We flew from Dunedin. That was the end of our trip because that's where he lives. So we ended up back in Dunedin. And then we flew from there up to Auckland to fly home. And there was a lot of stuff to see around there that we didn't really get a chance to see because we only had about a half a day in Dunedin, and that was on a pelagic trip. And then I realized if we'd been here another day, we could have taken the land tour that went out to where the albatrosses nest on this headland on the peninsula there, and probably see some other things in the area. And I know some of the Brits in our group were staying over an extra day and like renting a car or hiring a driver or something to go see some of the things there. But that's the stuff you learn after you're already
Yeah.
there and can't make changes.
Right.
Yeah,
Yep, and
they have penguins there too, right? In Dunedin. Did you see the penguins?
um
We didn't
I
see
didn't.
we didn't see the penguins. We tried to see the little blue penguins down at Stewart Island because they come ashore after dark, and so we were
Yeah.
down at the harbor looking for them. But
No, you didn't see
Melanie
them.
thought she saw one, but we didn't see one. I did see yellow-eyed penguins at when we were kayaking at Milford Sound in 2012, but not on this trip.
Mm.
And it could be where they were in their nesting season.
Yeah.
It
So
could be
I was there in
that.
December, and the blues came in probably right where you were on this, just that one wharf, and they
Yeah.
would be jumping up around probably about 9:30 at night. They would show up.
Wow.
That was kind of cool.
Yeah. Going back to Kathy's question about, the time of year, if we had been a couple of weeks early, we could have seen the Mount Cook lilies, there were other buttercups that are kind of showy that we probably would have seen.
Mhm.
The issue with that is, you really have to stay a longer time to get a better feel or better view of everything, because so much of it is elevation oriented, and North Island is different than the South Island in terms of timing of things, and
Yeah.
so there were, in a couple of locations, in the alpine areas, things hadn't started yet, and yet things were burnt out a bit down lower.
Right.
And looking at Virginia's pictures of Milford Sound there, when we did the boat tour, I think we saw two, maybe three waterfalls. It was dry. So, it's Milford Sound is known for, the boat traveling underneath the waterfalls, and there was no water coming down from
Yeah.
the alpine area. So
Yeah, and this was March. This picture was taken in March, so it was more fall.
yeah.
I have a question about that largest ranunculus in the world. Did you know that it was there, or did you just someone tell you there, tell you while you were walking and stood over?
Well, nobody told me while I was walking, because Susan and I were behind, with a couple other people. Um, and so, we got from Nature Trek a kind of like a itinerary and certain things that we would see, certain birds at this stop, certain plants at this stop. And then Mark, our guide, gave us a booklet, which was really is very interesting to look at that, had a much more complete detailing of what it was we were going to see on each day. The problem is, we were, other than reading it on the bus, we didn't have much time to spend doing anything like watching Brokenwood Mysteries on TV. And um, so, the book was really good, but, I'm reading it after the fact. And so I did do some,
150 pages.
Nice.
Oh,
yeah, it has
wow.
plant lists, like, has
Yeah.
lichens, grasses, all that kind of stuff in there for a lot of us,
Nice.
the
We
stops.
actually got him to sit down a few nights and go through the plant list with us so we could check off what we'd seen. Because we're just photographing everything, figuring out, we'll figure it out what it is later.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I do have a lot of notations I've made where he said what we saw, and then I could check and then go back and correlate my pictures to the list.
Right.
But I will say about the Mount Cook lily, the world's largest buttercup, I did see that blooming in November when I was at Mount Cook, but the wind was blowing sideways. It started raining sideways. Again, the weather was so much better on this trip between January and November. So that's your trade-off, I think, is probably
Right.
better weather in January, but
Well,
maybe some of the early blooming things you would see in November or
yeah.
December.
Again, as I mentioned before, this year, it's been it's either been forest fire, dry and forest fires, or it's been terrible flooding. So we think of
Flooding.
all the problems up in Western Washington, and it was like that or worse,
Mm,
um, in various places on both islands. So,
Right.
towns completely
Do they
underwater and covered
do
with
they
logs and
bring
things.
up climate change at all?
Pardon?
Do you on these tours, do they bring up the
Yeah.
topic of
Yeah.
climate change?
We talked about a lot of conservation and geology and weather and climate kinds of things.
Okay.
So
So Mark did talk about that. He said half of New Zealand's CO2 emissions comes from agriculture, and the majority are from their 2 million cows. Paul mentioned the dairy farms. So they've gotten rid of the sheep and converted the land to dairies. And then they produce all this milk, more than their country can handle. So that all gets converted into powdered milk and shipped to probably the Middle East or Southeast Asia. And so,
It's not good news to hear they want to introduce beef cows. Is that what you said?
They also have there's an ozone hole right over New
yeah,
Zealand. Their
yep,
rate of skin cancer is quite high.
yes,
yep.
yeah,
And that was talked about too.
yeah.
Oh, I thought that totally went away. There was a rumor that we didn't have to worry about the ozone layer anymore.
Apparently
It's
not in New
improved,
Zealand.
but
It's thin over New Zealand.
yeah,
Gotcha.
But Mark did mention putting on sunscreen and being aware that skin cancer rates are really high in New
yeah.
Zealand because their ozone layer is thinner.
Yeah, yeah. And well, there's a wonderful Maori village that you can tour. It's called Rotorua, which is really cool place because it's right in this big rift there, and it's all hot springs, and the whole town smells like sulfur. Did you
Yep.
guys? I don't know if you probably went by it or.
We
No,
stayed the night, I think, there.
no, we were
And
at
they
Lake
said that
Taupo.
pardon?
We didn't, I stayed at Rotorua in 2012.
Okay,
On our trip, we stayed at Taupo.
okay.
We
But
drove
you can.
through.
Drove by it.
We
I saw the
drove by
sign.
it. We went to the volcanic valley
Poconos.
that's east of Rotorua. But yes, I stayed there on my last trip, and we did do the dinner and the Maori program.
Yeah, it's really
Yeah,
nice. Yeah.
but I think that's a different tour than Birds and Botany.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you want to do the native stuff, that's somebody else's tour.
Well, yeah, we saw lots and lots of tour buses, and so most of those, Inga was here a little while ago. She did a Hardy Plant Society tour, there, I think just before we were there. But there were a lot of tour buses of, some Americans, but a lot of Japanese, Chinese, English, Germans, people from all over the world, and they're doing more cultural kinds of things. Oh, we're going to see Hoppeton today, or
Yeah.
this is where Aragon fell off the cliff into the river, or that kind of thing. So, or boating, there was a river where they were doing the speed boating on the river on rubber rafts, and kayaking, and so they're doing, there's tours that do all kinds of things, and so we opted for this nature trek tour, and partly because even though there was a lot of driving, we got a chance to get out and walk and see things and touch and that kind of thing. So that's kind of why we went on this. And I
Thanks
do want
to
to
all
mention,
three of you guys for sharing your experiences. You're definitely motivating a lot of people out.
yep, I do want to mention too that if you're limited on getting to New Zealand, at least directly from the United States. There's no flight directly from Portland or Seattle. It's either through San Francisco or LAX, and most of the airline, those, I think it's American, Delta, and um,
Or Vancouver.
and then also New Zealand Airlines and maybe United. So the airlines that go just do one flight a day, and so we did Delta, and had no problems other than having delayed flights, that kind of thing. But we had a connecting flight from Dunedin to Auckland by New Zealand Air, and that was part of the fee that we paid for the tour. And so when we got to the airport, put our bags in the thing. Okay, it fits in the thing, to show the size for the carry-ons. And then we put it on the weigh thing and said, oops, you're too heavy. And so they actually do, at least New Zealand Airlines for carry-on luggage does do the whole weight thing. And so I had my whole carry-on was totally empty and it was still heavy. And, what am I doing? And what am I going to do? And finally the guy let me on, but, I had,
Luckily, we got to the airport quite early
yeah,
because we ended up having to repack our luggage right there in the lobby.
I know.
and then also in Oakland now, for those that haven't been there for a while, they have both a international and a national terminal. So they're constructing kind of the areas between, and so we had to schlep our bags from the national to the international terminal over about a half a mile.
Yeah, you're talking Oakland, California.
So
No,
no, it's
Auckland.
Auckland. It looks like
Auckland.
Auckland, but it's
Okay.
actually pronounced Oakland.
Okay,
No,
gotcha.
no, it's
And-
I was
pronounced
wondering, and I
Auckland.
was
When
gonna
when
ask-
I was there, it was pronounced Auckland.
it's Auckland.
I don't know.
Could be
I
Auckland.
I looked at the
Okay,
online and it said, oh nope, it's pronounced Oakland, but I don't know.
so
Anyway,
there aren't any native oaks in
Yeah.
New Zealand. Trees,
yep.
No
Anyway,
oaks at all.
no oaks.
All right. It's probably,
Close.
I'm gonna-
Casarina is there, which is an oak, very close oak relative.
Thank you, Virginia. Yeah,
thank
see you
we're
guys
at,
later.
we're at our
Yeah.
9:15.
I
Yeah,
just
thank
wanted to
you.
say, I just wanted to welcome, we got I know at least one new member it's been very nice to be connected here. Just wanted to welcome you, Carol, out in Hood River. If you can hear me. Carol Fashing is joining us. So I'm happy that we've got a new member in Hood River.